Prince Louis, just 6 years old, did the unthinkable at his royal birthday party. What he said left everyone in shock, shook the royal palace, and changed the way the family would ever look at him. But was this just a tantrum or something much more powerful? Prince Louis' birthday had arrived, a day that should have been filled with joy and celebration. Yet within the grand marble halls of Windsor Castle, a quiet but undeniable tension brewed beneath the surface. What was supposed to be a moment of happiness for the young prince, surrounded by family and love, had instead become the battleground where royal tradition clashed with the untamed spirit of a child. As the royal family gathered for the event, no one could have anticipated the outburst that would send shockwaves through the palace, forever marking this day in history. Louis, just 6 years old, uttered words that were nothing short of shocking, words aimed squarely at Queen Camilla. "Shut up." His voice rang out sharp and clear, cutting through the room like a blade. The air seemed to freeze, every eye wide with disbelief. The heavy silence that followed was thick with shock. How could this be happening? What could possibly have provoked such a bold statement from a child so young? Was it merely the innocent outburst of a frustrated boy, or did it hint at something deeper, something more profound simmering beneath the surface? The day had been designed to be a birthday celebration fit for a royal. For weeks, Louis had envisioned the perfect party. He saw fountains of balloons rising toward the sky, his feet dancing through the rose maze, and playing beneath the ancient oak trees that had witnessed the passage of generations. The garden, a sacred space of beauty and history, would be his kingdom for the day. He imagined exploring the grounds with his siblings and cousins, embarking on grand adventures that would unfold in every corner. His sister, Princess Charlotte, leading the younger cousins in wild games of tag, while his older brother, Prince George, discovered the perfect tree to climb, its branches perfect for conquering. The garden was more than just a patch of royal grounds in Louis' mind. It was a playground, a boundless world of imagination where the walls of the palace disappeared, leaving only the wonders of childhood to explore. In his mind, the garden was a place of endless possibility. The sprawling grounds could become anything: an enchanted forest, a kingdom to rule, a world filled with magic and laughter. Every step in the grass was a new adventure, and every flower held the promise of a game yet to be played. He had envisioned running through the rose maze with abandon, his feet light as he chased after his cousins, feeling the breeze on his face, the soft grass underfoot. He had imagined racing around the ancient oak trees, its weathered branches stretching toward the sky as if guiding him on an epic quest. To Louis, this garden was not just part of a palace, but his kingdom where the rules were his own, where his imagination was free to soar. Yet, as the day unfolded, it became clear that Louis' vision for his birthday would not match the royal expectations that had been set in motion. Birthdays in the royal family are not just about cake and games. They are about maintaining appearances, about upholding tradition, and about following the rules that have been etched into the family's legacy for centuries. As the preparations for the party continued, Louis realized that his day would be anything but carefree. The reality was far from the garden adventures he had imagined. What had been envisioned as a day of pure childhood joy was being transformed into something else, something controlled, something formal. But Louis was not a child who could easily be controlled. He had his own ideas about what made a birthday special, and his spirit, unbroken and uncontained, was not one to be easily tamed by the walls of Windsor Castle, no matter how grand. Prince Louis' birthday had arrived, a day that was meant to be a joyful celebration, full of laughter and love. But beneath the polished surface of Windsor Castle, a quiet storm was beginning to brew. The palace, usually a place of grace and order, had become a battleground, one where royal tradition stood in stark opposition to the boundless spirit of a young boy. What was supposed to be a day of light-hearted celebration had quickly become something far more complex. As the royal family assembled for the event, no one could have foreseen the outburst that would echo through the grand halls of the palace, sending shockwaves that would ripple through the royal walls. Louis, at the tender age of 6, uttered words that were as shocking as they were bold. "Shut up," he declared, his voice sharp and clear, cutting through the air like a knife. The words seemed to hang in the room, suspended in time, as though the very air around them was holding its breath. The stunned silence that followed was with disbelief. What could possibly have provoked such a response from a young prince? Was this merely the tantrum of a frustrated child, or did it hint at something deeper, a flicker of defiance, a yearning for freedom that was too powerful to be contained? What could have ignited such a sudden break from the norm? The entire room was frozen, each person caught in the tension of a moment they were unsure how to navigate. This was supposed to be a day of celebration, a birthday like any other for a young royal. For weeks, Louis had eagerly envisioned the perfect party. He had pictured fountains of balloons rising into the sky, his feet dancing across the lawn, exploring the rose maze and playing beneath the towering oak trees that had stood for generations. The garden in his mind would be his kingdom, endless fields of possibility, where imagination could run free, where every corner held the promise of adventure. He had envisioned running and laughing with his cousins, finding secret spots among the bushes to hide and seek, chasing one another with unbridled joy. He had imagined his sister, Princess Charlotte, leading their younger cousins in games of tag, their laughter filling the air. His older brother, Prince George, would find the perfect tree to climb, and together they would play and explore, their spirits wild and unconfined by the palace's many walls. To Louis, the garden was not merely a part of the royal grounds. It was a playground, an untamed world where he could create his own rules, one where the boundaries of royal decorum seemed to melt away. The thought of exploring those grounds, of running wild with his siblings and cousins, filled him with uncontainable excitement. To him, the sun-dappled paths and the fragrant flowers were not just part of the palace, they were gateways to a world of magic, a place where the walls of royal protocol seemed to vanish, leaving nothing but the joy of being a child. But the reality of royal birthdays, Louis was quickly learning, was never quite so simple. These celebrations, while full of outward grandeur, were always steeped in centuries of tradition. Every moment was carefully crafted to maintain the royal image. Royal birthdays were not just about cake, balloons, and games. They were about appearances, about projecting an image of perfection and dignity to the world. And Queen Camilla, with her deeply ingrained sense of tradition, had her own vision of what Louis' birthday should be. To her, a proper celebration was one that adhered to the strictest standards of royal decorum. The carefree energy of a young child was a chaos that had no place in her carefully ordered world. For her, the day should unfold in the formality of the palace, away from the unpredictable energy of children playing freely. When Queen Camilla suggested moving the party indoors, Louis' world seemed to tilt on its axis. The grand stateroom, with its towering portraits of long-dead royals and its heavy velvet curtains, suddenly felt like a prison. The bright sunlight that usually filled the garden, casting playful shadows on the grass, would now be trapped behind thick windows. The lightness and warmth of the garden, where Louis had imagined himself running with his cousins, would be replaced with the cold formality of the palace's interior. There would be no room for cartwheels, no room for treasure hunts, no space for unfiltered childhood joy. The excitement that had once burned brightly in Louis' heart was now fading, replaced by a growing sense of frustration and disappointment. His small hands trembled as he tugged at his mother's sleeve, his voice barely above a whisper but filled with that pure, unclouded logic of a child. "Mommy, the garden has the butterfly bush and James said he'd bring his new puppy." His words, though simple, spoke volumes. To Louis, the garden was a sanctuary, a place of wonder and joy where his imagination could run wild. It was where he could be free, not bound by the formalities and expectations of the royal world. But in the stateroom, surrounded by portraits of past monarchs and delicate antiques, there was no room for that kind of freedom. The formal setting of the royal rooms felt foreign to him, as if they were designed for someone else, someone who wasn't a child, someone who didn't need to run, jump, and laugh with abandon. But Queen Camilla, with all the weight of royal tradition pressing down upon her, was unwavering. She insisted that the formal tea would go ahead as planned, with crystal glasses filled with elderflower cordial, perfectly pressed linens, and the hauntingly beautiful strains of a string quartet in the background. The birthday would be a formal affair, no space for the spontaneity that a young child like Louis craved. Louis would have to practice his bow for the Archbishop, ensuring he greeted the dignitaries with the utmost decorum. Every moment of the day was being meticulously planned and executed, but none of it seemed to act. Knowledge the simple truth that to Louis this was supposed to be his special day, a day to be spent exploring, playing, and creating memories that would last a lifetime. As Camilla outlined her vision, Louis could feel his disappointment growing. He fidgeted with his collar, his small hands trembling as they clenched into fists. The face that had been filled with excitement just moments before now wore an expression of quiet rebellion. The world he had dreamed of, one filled with laughter, adventure, and carefree fun, was slipping away, replaced by a vision that seemed so far removed from everything he had hoped for. And yet, despite his growing frustration, Louis said nothing. He simply listened, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. In that moment, Louis understood something that few could have comprehended. Royal birthdays weren't just about the child. They were about the family, the history, and the image that needed to be projected to the world. And that image, as Louis was learning, did not have room for the messy, unpolished joy of a 6-year-old. But even as the walls of royal protocol closed in around him, Louis' spirit refused to be contained. His eyes sparkled with that same fire, the fire of a child who would not be shaped or molded into something he was. And though the tension continued to simmer, it was clear that this birthday, this clash between Louis' boundless imagination and the palace's traditions, was about to reach its breaking point. This clash between royal tradition and childhood exuberance was not a new one. As Queen Camilla's influence over the royal children continued to grow, so did her efforts to impose an ever-tightening grip of structure and formality on their young lives. What had once been a childhood filled with spontaneous joy, laughter, and innocent adventure now became something far more regimented. Every aspect of their days, once fluid and full of freedom, was now governed by rules meticulously filtered through the lens of royal tradition. Gone were the impromptu tea parties in the kitchen, where the children would sit on the floor with the staff, laughing and making a mess in the warmth of the palace's informal spaces. In their place were highly structured afternoon teas with perfectly set china, conversation cards, and well-practiced smiles. The gardens, which once promised endless hours of carefree exploration, now came with a list of guidelines, each step carefully monitored and often restricted. Even the toys in the royal nursery were no longer chosen for their fun or imagination-stirring qualities, but for their supposed educational value. It was a kingdom of knowledge and decorum, but little room was left for the wildness of childhood to bloom. Yet in the midst of all this, Louis remained different. His natural, unfiltered joy and exuberant defiance had not been subdued by royal protocol or the weight of tradition. If anything, the more the palace tried to impose rules and limits on him, the more Louis seemed to break free, like a wild stallion refusing to be tamed. His antics, though often disruptive to the well-oiled machinery of royal propriety, were a breath of fresh air, a reminder that even within these ancient walls, there was room for spontaneity, for unpolished, unrefined joy. Louis continued to express himself with a freedom that was both endearing and at times unnerving to those around him. His wide-eyed enthusiasm, his mischievous grins, and his ability to speak his mind without the heavy filters of adult constraint made him an irresistible figure to the public. They saw in him a raw authenticity that had been all but erased in the lives of so many other royals before him. To them, Louis was real, a little prince unafraid to show the world his true self, despite the immense pressure and expectations that came with his title. But Queen Camilla saw things through a very different lens. To her, a prince must learn control, restraint, and composure from an early age. The energy that Louis displayed so freely was, in her eyes, something that needed to be reined in, shaped, and molded to fit the image of royal propriety that she held so dearly. But the question remained, how does one contain the uncontainable? How does one silence the sun, tame the wind, or calm a storm? The more Camilla attempted to suppress Louis' spirited nature, the more his defiance seemed to spark, growing more powerful and unmanageable with each passing day. It became a battle of wills, a contest between royal order and the wild, untamed energy of childhood. And then, at the height of the tension, came Louis' birthday celebration, the moment when the struggle between them reached its boiling point. It was as if the day itself had become the culmination of everything that had been building for so long: the frustration, the expectations, the conflicting visions of what it meant to be a child in a royal family. Louis, a mere 6 years old, stood at the center of it all, his face filled with the determination of a young boy who refused to conform, refused to be shaped into something he was not. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface finally erupted, and the palace, those grand ancient walls that had witnessed centuries of royal history, held its breath. Louis, unrestrained and fiercely defiant, had reached his breaking point. It was in that moment, as the carefully planned celebration unfolded before him, that the true depth of the conflict became apparent. Louis' spontaneous spirit, which had been clashing against the suffocating grip of tradition for so long, had finally found its voice. The birthday that had been designed to fit the mold of royal decorum, the crystal glasses, the string quartet, the well-pressed linens, suddenly felt like a cage, trapping the essence of what it meant to be a child. The formalities, the expectations, the ancient rules, they all collided with the uncontainable spirit of a boy who would not be bound by them. And so the moment that had been building for so long finally arrived, as Louis' defiance broke through the surface in a way no one could have predicted. Prince Louis' birthday had arrived, and with it, the weight of a family steeped in centuries of tradition. On the surface, it should have been a joyous occasion, his 6th birthday, a milestone filled with cake, balloons, and laughter. But as the grand marble halls of Windsor Castle filled with family and staff, a quiet but unmistakable tension simmered beneath the polished surface. What was meant to be a lighthearted celebration for a young prince was slowly transforming into something more complicated, a struggle between the unbridled joy of childhood and the heavy burden of royal expectations. No one could have anticipated the storm that was about to erupt. Louis, just 6 years old, stood at the center of the unfolding drama. With all the pure defiance of a child, he suddenly shouted, "Shut up! This is my party. Why do we always have to do what you say?" The words, though simple, were like a bolt of lightning, crackling through the silence of the room. The air seemed to thicken with shock, and for a moment time itself felt suspended. The entire palace, a place that had borne witness to countless royal events, now found itself frozen in disbelief. Even the ancient portraits that adorned the walls, silent witnesses to the weight of history, seemed to hold their breath. How could this have happened? How could a 6-year-old, one of the youngest members of the royal family, break protocol in such a way? The words were not just an outburst of frustration. They were a cry from the heart of a child who felt trapped within the very walls that were supposed to protect him. They were the words of a boy who yearned for freedom, for the ability to simply be himself without the suffocating weight of royal decorum pressing down on him. In those simple words, Louis had expressed something profound, not just his frustration with the constraints placed upon him, but a longing for a life that was less about appearances and more about experience. He was a child, one who wanted to run, to laugh, to play. And in that moment, he refused to comply with the illusion of perfection that had been so carefully cultivated around him. As the room fell into stunned silence, Queen Camilla, ever the guardian of tradition, found herself caught off guard. The formal tea, which had been meant to uphold royal grace, now seemed like a distant memory. Her teacup froze midway to her lips, her face cycling through a whirlwind of emotions: shock, anger, hurt, and almost imperceptibly something that resembled understanding. This was not just a child rebelling against authority. This was a young boy expressing something deeper, something that went beyond the royal family's expectations. After a long, heavy pause, William, Louis' father, knelt beside him. His voice was calm, yet filled with understanding as he whispered something into Louis' ear. In that instant, the tension that had hung so thickly in the air began to dissolve, like mist in the morning sun. Louis' shoulders, which had been tense with frustration, began to relax, the storm inside him slowly subsiding. Louis had, in his own way, managed to break through the heavy walls of tradition. It was a subtle yet profound shift in the royal dynamic. William, ever the mediator, saw the deeper implications of what had transpired. He recognized the significance of the moment, not just as a conflict over a birthday, but as a clash of values, a battle between the unrestrained joy of childhood and the suffocating rigidity of royal duty. And it was in this moment that he suggested a compromise, a solution that would allow both Louis' fiery spirit and the tradition of the royal family to coexist. The formal tea would still take place, but it would be shorter, less rigid. The string quartet would play, but Louis' favorite Disney songs would join the repertoire, blending the old with the new, the tradition with the excitement of childhood. The garden party, which had initially been threatened by the formalities of the day, would still go ahead, but with one important adjustment: there would be space for free play. Mud pies, laughter, running through the grass, everything Louis had dreamed of could still happen. The compromise was an elegant one that allowed for the solemnity of royal duty while also leaving room for the joy and spontaneity that every child deserves. And after a moment's reflection, Camilla, recognizing the wisdom in her son-in-law's suggestion, agreed. In that instant, something shifted. Camilla, who had spent so much of her time enforcing royal protocol and adhering strictly to tradition, found herself embracing a new way forward. As the day progressed, something truly remarkable occurred. Queen Camilla, who had once seen childhood as something to be controlled and shaped, found herself drawn into the very games that had once seemed so frivolous. She laughed, truly laughed, as she chased Louis through the royal garden, her usual royal poise momentarily forgotten. For the first time, she saw the garden not as a symbol of duty, but as a place of joy, of connection, of shared moments between family. This was a rare and precious moment, one that marked a turning point in how the royal family would move forward. For Louis, nothing had changed in the most important way. He remained the same joyful, stubborn boy he had always been, full of life and energy. His laughter still echoed through the palace halls, a reminder that even within the walls of the royal family there was room for the unrefined beauty of childhood. But now something deeper had shifted. The royal family, and especially Camilla, had begun to recognize that Louis' spirited nature, his untamed, unyielding joy, was not something to be stifled. It was something to be celebrated. As the sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows through the royal halls, the story of Louis' birthday and his defiant outburst became something far more significant. It was no longer just a family event. It had become a moment of change, a turning point in the royal family's history. Louis, with his natural exuberance, had reminded them all that tradition could bend without breaking, and that sometimes the most important moments of growth come not from grand speeches or diplomatic efforts, but from the simple, honest words of a child who dares to speak his truth. In the days that followed, a new energy began to fill the palace. Camilla, having witnessed the power of Louis' defiance and the wisdom in the compromise that followed, began to allow more freedom for the royal children. It wasn't a drastic change, but there was a subtle shift. The children would still be raised in the royal tradition, but now there was room for more play, more laughter, more spontaneous joy. The palace, which had once been a place of strict formality, was slowly transforming into a space where both tradition and childhood could coexist. For Louis, life continued much the same. He was still the same playful, stubborn, joyful boy he had always been. But now, in the eyes of his family, there was a growing recognition of the value of his spirit. His joy was no longer something to be contained, it was something to be celebrated. And in the quiet corners of the palace, the royal staff exchanged looks of surprise and relief. What had started as a simple birthday celebration had turned into something far greater. A reminder that sometimes the most profound changes come not from power or position, but from the pure, honest heart of a child. As the final guests departed that evening, and the last remnants of the party faded into memory, Louis and Camilla were seen walking together through the garden. Their shadows stretched long in the setting sun, their conversation too soft to hear, but their body language spoke volumes. There was a shift in the air, a new understanding between them, a subtle yet undeniable change. The palace, for all its tradition and grandeur, had felt the tremors of that shift. And for the first time in a long while, there was hope that perhaps the future could hold space for both the old and the new, for both tradition and childhood. What do you think of Prince Louis' defiance? Was it the rebellion of a child or a sign of something much deeper? How do you think this shift in the royal family will affect their future? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories from the royal family. Catch you in the next one.